It is the year 0079 of the Universal Century. A half-century has passed since Earth began moving its burgeoning population into gigantic orbiting space colonies. A new home for mankind, where people are born and raised and die. 9 months ago, the cluster of colonies furthest from the Earth, called Side 3, proclaimed itself the Principality of Zeon and launched a war of independence against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month and saw both sides lose half their respective populations. People were horrified by the indescribable atrocities that had been committed in the name of independence. 8 months had passed since the rebellion began. They were at a stalemate. The 1-Year War is the single most important story in the entirety of the Gundam franchise. Today, we begin going through the entire thing. We're going to explain exactly how this whole thing began and how it ended. Now, before I get into the beginning, one thing that I need to mention is that I am not going to include any of the retcons from Gundam Unicorn in this video, because I'd prefer to discuss those changes and my issues with them whenever I get around to reviewing that OVA series. As we begin our explanation of the 1-Year War and its various complications, we will primarily be focusing on the major political players of the conflict, though I will be making a point to show when certain events from the side stories take place. So, at one point or another, I'll reference events from MS Igloo, the 08th MS Team, Rise from the Ashes, the Blue Destiny, and more. This is going to possibly be a 4-part video series as well, so buckle in. We're going to begin with the events that lead up to the war, and then we'll break down the war into 3 sections: the journey to Jabro, Soldiers of Sorrow, and finally, encounters in space. So, let's begin, shall we?
Amuro, let's do it!
Part 1. Prelude to War. The catalyst of the 1-Year War and the events within it start with one man, Zeon Dun. He was born in the year 0009 of the Universal Century, and had a wife and 2 children. Zeon Dun was a philosopher, who developed 2 specific philosophies on top of a theory of human evolution. The 2 philosophies were Elsheim, which is the idea that Earth is sacred and that mankind was always meant to leave it and move into space, and Sidism, that all space colonies should be independent from the Earth Federation. He was also the pioneer of the New Type theory, which believed that humanity would eventually develop a 6th sense to communicate with one another in a much more superior manner. Given how colony citizens were often treated like second-class citizens by the Earth Federation, these philosophies resonated with people within the colonies. This was especially true of Zeon Dun's home of Side 3. Now, he was eventually elected to lead Side 3 in 0053 of the Universal Century, and at that point he declared Side 3's independence. The new nation was established as the Republic of Zeon. As you can imagine, the Earth Federation wasn't too pleased with this, responding with what was called the Bardo policy, which halted all resources to the colony from the Earth. Then, Zeon Dun responded by creating a colonial guard, just in case the Federation decided to attack. So, within a short order, not only did Zeon Dun declare independence for Side 3, he also began to militarize it as well, though his logic for that particular maneuver is understandable. Now, we've already established one of the major families in Zeon with the Dun family, with Zeon Dun, his wife, and his 2 children. Now, there's a couple others of note in regards to the story of Mobile Suit Gundam. A minor one is the Rahl family, where Jimba Rahl and his wife were close friends of Zeon Dun and his wife. Now, they do have some significance, but I will come back to them. The major family to keep in mind, aside from the Duns, is the Zabi family. Now, the patriarch of the family was Degwin Soto Zabi, who was another close confidant of Zeon Dun. Daegwon served as the chief of staff for Zeon Daikun from the Zeonic origin of 0058 all the way to 10 years later in 0068. Now, in 0068, Zeon Daikun suffered from a heart attack, and then Daegwon Zabi claimed that he was named as his successor. Now, this is when Jinba Ral comes in. Now, it's flat out stated in the non-canon Gundam The Origin that Jinba knew from the get-go that the heart attack was BS, and that Zeon Daikun was assassinated. Now, I'm of the opinion that the canonical version of Jinba probably felt the same way, which is why he and his wife harbored Zeon Daikun's two children, Casval and Artesia. If that indeed is the case, it was the right call because Daegwon's oldest son, Giran, very quickly started his own Night of Long Knives. He initiated a purge of Daikun loyalists as soon as he got the chance, as Daegwon declared Zeon was switching from a republic to a monarchy, rechristening it the Principality of Zeon. From here, Zeon continued to mobilize its military forces. The main commander and self-styled Führer of these forces was Giran, the eldest. His younger brother, Dozal, who's a mountain of a man, was made the head of the space forces. Their sister Caecilia Zabi would command the mobile assault force, and then the baby of the family, Garma, would gain a command position as the war continued onward. Now, we're still a good distance away from when the first shots were fired in this war. While all of this political mumbo-jumbo happened, there were technological changes that bear mentioning. The first is the creation of the AMBAC system. AMBAC stands for Active Mass Balance Auto Control. What made the AMBAC system so special is that it allowed near thrusterless maneuverability in space just by simply changing the center of a machine's mass. Now, the second major technological discovery was that of the Minovsky particle by Dr. T.Y. Minovsky. Now, the generators that would use this subatomic particle that he discovered could be as small as a quartet of refrigerators. Now, that might seem big, but considering that we're talking about machines that would use these would be about a minimum of 10 meters tall, it's a significant development considering anything from the size of a mobile suit all the way up to a battleship. However, the Minovsky particle specifically in these generators could block out certain types of radiation, including both radar signals and radio signals. The reason that this is significant is that in space combat, or really combat in general, with machines as they are presented within the series, couldn't be some sort of super long-range shooting gallery that you might see in another science fiction franchise. Instead, combat has to be done within a visual range, forcing much more close-quarters battles. From here, a revolutionary machine would be developed, the mobile suit. Essentially a humanoid robotic suit that would become the most lethal combat technology developed in the Universal Century. Now, there are 3 mobile suits worth mentioning in Zeon's creation of the technology, though it took more than 3 to actually get it in a working, stable place. Now, the first of the 3 is the MS-01 Crabman. Now, this was a pretty humble mobile suit, and in reality was just a proof of concept, showing that, yes, we can make this. The first version stood only 10 meters tall, and then the finalized version was 13.5 meters. Now, once this proof of concept was done in 0073, Zeon started working on suits that could be used in combat. The first one of note, developed in 0075, was the EMS-04 Zuda. Now, as seen in MS Igloo, the Zuda was a pretty effective mobile suit, but it had a fatal flaw. If you pushed the engine too much, the suit would blow up. So, the first truly mass-produced mobile suit that Zeon would put out would be the MS-05 Zaku, later called the MS-05 Zaku 1. And then, 2 years later, in 0077, Zeon would roll out the upgrade, and its most iconic mobile suit, the Zaku 2. Now, the initial intention of the Zaku 2 was for this to be the workhorse unit of the Zeonic forces. Building on the Zaku 1's frame, it received much better armor, improved thrusters, and a much more powerful thermonuclear reactor. This machine could take off at a full sprint of 85 kilometers an hour, could leap 100 meters into the air, and lift around 80-ish tons with one hand. It could be equipped with a 120mm machine gun with 100 rounds per drum magazine, a 280mm bazooka, and a weapon called a Heat Hawk, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a hand axe with a superheated blade for close combat. It also had grenades, and could also be fixed with disposable rocket launchers called Sturmfausts, or with a pair of 3-tube missile pods, one on each leg. During this time period, a couple of blonde children were being raised by a family with the last name of Mass, after Jim Barral got these children to Earth. These children were renamed Sayla Mass and Eduardo Mass, but in actuality were Artesia Daikun and Casval Daikun. In 0074, the two youths split up. Sayla would move to Side 7, keeping her new name. Eduardo, however, would infiltrate the Zeon Military Academy, taking on the new name of Char Aznable. During his time there, he declared his revenge on the Zabi family, and began hiding his face, saying that he had burn scars that he would prefer not to impose on the public. He graduated from the Zeon Academy in 0078, first serving in Kycilia Zabi's Teaching Mobile Battalion, and then later was reassigned to Dozle Zabi's Space Assault Force. Then, war came.
Sign here on the dotted line, Patriots, and I'll give you your discount cards.
Just out of curiosity, we could use the cards to buy gum, then immediately quit the army, right?
You know, playing you off for chumps.
Correct. There's no obligation. Unless, of course, war were declared.
What's that?
War were declared.
On January 3rd, UC 0079, the Principality of Zeon declared war. And 3 seconds, let me repeat that, 3 seconds afterwards, they launched a surprise attack on Side 1, Side 2, and Side 4 simultaneously. This was the coming out party of the mobile suit in wartime application, and the Federation didn't know what hit them. The Zeon forces would go in and eliminate the Federation forces within those areas, then would slaughter the civilian inhabitants of these colonies with poison gas. Oh, by the way, these are the same forces that say they represent the Space Noids, and they're already genociding Space Noids. Way to win the PR war, Giran, you dumb fuck. Also, keep these events in mind for when we get to Unicorn in the future. Now, during this time, Side 6 wisely declared its neutrality in this conflict. Now, during the attack, Zeon forces secured Island Ifish, which is one colony within the cluster of colonies known as Side 2. Now, by secured, I mean what I had said a moment ago. After they defeated the Federation troops, a Zaku 1 that was piloted by one Sima Garahao launched a G3 gas container into the colony, killing most of the civilians. She was lied to, being told it was sleeping gas. One of the Federation soldiers on this colony who saw the slaughter that was put on by Zeon was Ensign Shiro Amada, who would develop a deep-seated hatred for the Principality of Zeon after this event, and for good reason. Sima Garahao and her forces would remain traumatized from the genocide that they carried out, and would carry a cynicism about Zeon and its intentions during their entire service history during the war. The colony itself would end up armored and reinforced, on top of installing nuclear pulse engines on it. This plan was known as Operation British, and was the brainchild of both Giran Zabi and Dozle Zabi, though it's up for debate whether or not Dozle ever knew about the gassings, or if his brother kept him in the dark about his genocidal actions. On January 4th, the retrofitting was complete. Federation interception fleets fought Zeon forces several times between January 6th to January 8th, when they realized that the Federation headquarters of Jaburo was going to be the likely target of this haphazardly put together colony bomb. The mobile suits would be the difference maker in this battle. Now, normally a Zeon mobile suit costs about 3 times what a tank would, but given that they had the numbers disadvantage and still managed to win these space battles, with these suits as a trump card just showed how much of a difference maker the Zaku's development was. It's hard to argue the superiority of a fighter jet when these things carry more firepower and can tear through entire battleships, along with punting fighters if they get in the way. Now, despite their attempts, the Federation could not stop the colony from falling. However, they did do enough damage to it so that it broke off and actually did not hit Jabro. Now, unfortunately for the people of Sydney, this colony didn't have a high opinion of the former prison colony and landed right on top of the Australian capital, destroying it. This impact created shockwaves of damage as well, with secondary damage from disasters such as tsunamis and other storms lasting for an entire week. Afterwards, 16% of Australia was flooded, with a 500-kilometer wide crater now sitting where Sydney used to be. There would also be abnormal weather phenomena on Earth for 6 years, and the impact of the colony slightly accelerated the Earth's rotation. Now, what's funny about all this is that Zeon considered this a major failure. Their Vice Admiral actually committed suicide when he found out that they didn't hit Jabro, and Zeon immediately began planning their next offensive. They wanted to do Operation British 2, Electric Zakulu. On the 13th of January, Dozle Zabi took command of the 1st Zeon Combined Fleet at Solomon and headed for Side 5. Now, a part of that fleet and its actions can be seen in the first episode of MS Igloo, where the Jotunheim, see I got it right this time, brought in a prototype beam cannon called the Jormungand for battle. As with most experiments that the Jotunheim brought around, it was basically good for one shot. Now, this subsector that Zeon was headed towards was called Loom, and the Federation mobilized under the command of then Vice Admiral Johann Abraham Revel. Revel mustered a fleet 3 times that of Zeon, with 308 combat vessels and 84 support vessels, with a backup fleet remaining at the Earth base of Luna 2. When the battle commenced, as you would expect, Dozle Zabi ordered all mobile suits to be scrambled. One of these mobile suits was a red Zaku 2, piloted by none other than Char Aznable. Now, the Jotunheim was taken by surprise with all of this because they weren't expecting all of these mobile suits to come out of nowhere. Char Aznable, being the team player that he is, took the time to warn the Jotunheim that a mobile suit attack was going to be commencing, and yes, this was part of the plan. During the battle, several Zeon pilots made their names legendary here. Ramba Ral, the son of Jimba Ral, was one of them, alongside Shin Matsunaga, the Red Lightning Johnny Raiden, the Black Tri-Stars. It's also possible that the future Nightmare of Solomon, Anavel Gato, could have been there as well, but it's never really been confirmed. He was there during Operation British. But most importantly, this would be where Char Aznable would get his famous nickname of the Red Comet. During the battle, Char single-handedly destroyed 5 battleships, an incredible feat, considering at this time he was only 20 years of age. Over 80% of the Federation forces deployed to Loom were lost at the battle. Of the original 392 vessels that were deployed, only 42 survived. Zeon, on the other hand, only saw 8 of its battleships destroyed. Side 5 was completely destroyed during the battle as well. As such, another Operation British was not going to be attempted. However, the Black Tri-Stars managed to capture the escape craft of one Vice Admiral Revel after his ship got sunk. After seeing the damage that the mobile suits were able to do, Daegwon Zabi ordered a propaganda broadcast on the 17th of January that was broadcast to all of Earth, showing off the battle results, the fearsome mobile suits, and the fact that they captured General Revel. Now, at this point, Zeon began to move towards a total surrender from the Earth Federation forces. Had they managed to pull this off, they would have essentially defeated the entire Earth military with minimal forces, almost completely on the backs of mobile suit development. Just as a side note, let's think about that for a second. The war had only been going on for 2 weeks. Zeon had a very small military force, and they about had Earth in a checkmate, simply because of the development of the mobile suit. Let me just say, once again, that anybody that thinks that mobile suits like this, if this tech was possible, would be a waste compared to tanks and jets, can suck my dick. Anyway, on January 31st, Federation and Zeon representatives met at an Antarctic research station to sign what Zeon assumed was going to be that very surrender. However, the fortunes of the Earth Federation changed forever. During the negotiations, word got to that very Antarctic base that Revel had been freed by a group of Federation agents and Zeon defectors. From there, he gave the following speech. Fellow citizens of the Earth Federation, I speak to you now not only as General Revel, commander of our armed forces, but as Johann Abraham Revel, a survivor, like many of you here, of this horrible war. Despite the innumerable losses, despite the state our Federation is in, I appeal to you all. Zeon is exhausted. They have become low on ships, weapons, and troops, and even ammunition. Why then should we surrender to Zeon? Let us not forget the arrogance of the Daegwon Soto Zabi who had usurped power within Zeon. Proclaiming the people of Zeon as the chosen people, he justified the idea that we of Earth are bound by Earth's gravity, stuck in archaic ways of thinking, incapable of grasping the new changes of life. And because of this, Zeon has no right to listen to the Earth Federation. However, although Daegwon Zabi may be wrong about us as a whole, I will admit to him that if there were any true evil within our Earth Federation, it is the weak-kneed bureaucratic leaders of our government, unable to ever think for themselves, sinking into their own corruption. However, this does not excuse Daegwon Zabi for attempting to start a dynasty of Zeon dictators. Even if we do the unthinkable and recognize the principality of Zeon as a sovereign nation, we will never sink to our knees in surrender. The Earth Federation was founded on the ideals of individual rights, the epitome of knowledge in our short history. Also, if it weren't for the Federation, the colonies would have never come into being. But now, Daegwon Zabi's son, Girin Zabi, wishes to take his father's vision a step further. By saying the Federation is weak and backwards in its ways of thinking, Zeon has the right to slaughter everyone who stands in its way of progress. Does this excuse the death of 4 billion people? No! The Federation will not excuse his monstrous actions. And so, fellow citizens of the Earth Federation, will Girin send Luna 2 into Earth? No. Does Zeon have the ability to make troops from nowhere? No. Does Zeon, despite these facts, have the capability of defeating the Federation? No. Girin is hoping that by bluffing and sleight of hand, coupled with the loss of 4 billion lives, that the Federation will surrender to him. However, because of my good fortune, I witnessed the truth and I shall reiterate it. Zeon is exhausted. Now, more than ever, we mustn't falter to their demands. We must rise up as one unified Earth Federation and defeat Zeon. Long live the Earth Federation. After this speech, the terms of the agreement changed. Instead of creating a surrender, we had the Antarctic Treaty, which had the following terms. 1. Use of NBC weapons, nuclear, biological, chemical, as well as large mass weapons such as colony bombs, is prohibited. They would also make the blueprints of nuclear weapon republic. Number 2. Attacking the Jupiter energy fleet, permanent lunar cities, and other neutral zones are completely prohibited. This would mean combat in places like Side 6 airspace were not allowed. But however, the area of Granada, which was already occupied by Zeon, was not included in this. Number 3. Prisoners of war must be treated humanely. However, this required these soldiers to be captured in uniform. If they were out of uniform, they were considered unlawful combatants and not protected by the treaty. This, by the way, does have significance a little bit later that I'll explain during the Soldiers of Sorrow section. Now, this obviously took colony drops and nukes off the table, but Zeon still had mobile suits as a trump card. As you could see in MS Igloo 2, trying to bring down one of these behemoths without a mobile suit of your own usually ended up with entire squads being decimated. So, Zeon began to directly invade Earth under the command of Garma Zabi. Zeon used the captured materials on the Earth to their advantage. After 3 months, Zeon controlled most of Europe, Asia, and North America. Though some Federation troops were able to stem the tide of the Zeonic forces through mobile suit killer units and even stealing Zaku's of their own, the Federation realized they were going to have to develop their own mobile suits if they were going to win this war. Thus, the Federation began the planning of Operation V, which would include the prototypes of future mass production Federation mobile suits. Under the supervision of the scientist and chief engineer Tim Ray, 3 mobile suits were developed. The first was the RX-75 gun tank. This mobile suit was equipped with 2 main weapons. The first was the 120mm low recoil cannons mounted on the shoulders. These have a range of up to 260 kilometers. The gun tank's arms had 2 4-tube BOP missile launchers, which is a mouthful, and they also fire anti-aircraft missiles with a 20-kilometer range. Now, obviously, by its design, this mobile suit wasn't quite the bipedal death machine that a Zaku 2 could be. So, though it could hit hard, it didn't have the necessary mobility to really hang with it. However, it did have a core block system, like a lot of suits that the Federation would develop, where the central cockpit could be occupied by a Federation core fighter, allowing the pilot to switch to a different mobile suit on the fly, or make an escape in a desperate situation. The next mobile suit developed was called the RX-77 gun cannon. This 2-legged mid-range mobile suit was the first one to show that the Federation was not screwing around when it came to their response to Zeon's technology. As you can see on the gun cannon's shoulders, it sported 2 240mm cannons that could fire about 40 shots and could be fired as rapidly as a Zaku's machine gun. That's insane firepower when you consider that 240mm is the size of a Zaku bazooka. On top of that, it had head-mounted Vulcans. Now these are just 60mm guns, which don't have a ton of offensive power, but they can be used to lay down suppressive fire, destroy enemy mobile suit cameras, and then of course shoot down opposing missiles. The real kicker, though, was the rifle that the gun cannon holds in its hand. You see, beam weaponry was not something that mobile suits were using at this point in time. These types of weapons were reserved for ships, because the initial thought was that you couldn't miniaturize the tech. Except you could. And Tim Ray and his team, well, they did. However, the beam rifle on the gun cannon was quite powerful. Tim Ray didn't have something that could really surpass the mobility of the Zaku 2 on top of the firepower. They did develop a third suit, and all 3 of these were moved to the colony of Side 7. It's at this little slice of space that the Federation's fortunes would finally change.